Hi, Bob. It's a real pleasure to be here today and an honor for me to talk to you. I want to start out with your early life and just tell us about growing up in Southern California and working for H.W. Phillips and going from there.
Well, yeah, it's been a long road, but looking back, it looks like it's very short. And I think this is my 55th year of doing this, and it feels like it's my second or third year.
Bob, tell me the history of H.W. Phillips before you came on board with the company.
That's interesting. My grandfather started when he was 50 years old, and he would load up a panel truck, Model A panel truck, and drive into Los Angeles and service the produce market. So he would sell chains and rope and light bulbs. They didn't have steel beams in those days for vehicles, and became kind of a fix-it type person. Within the next couple of years, he finally got enough business where he could put together a store, and that store was on 8th and Central in Los Angeles, right a kitty corner from the produce market. And from there, he would again install spotlights. He developed his own signal arm, and the signal arm was one of those things that you look in the old movies and you might see them. A driver pulls down a crank handle and the arm comes up, and right turn, left turn, stop, and well before the directional lights became popular. Up until 1944, my father died of contracting TB, and I was 2.5 years old. And then from that point, my grandfather ran the business, and it was fairly successful. They had up to 8 employees, I've heard. And then in 1946, he contacted cataracts, and it got to be such a bad case of cataracts that he couldn't see very well, so he couldn't drive. So in '46, my grandfather retired. My mother and grandmother ran the company, but during that period there, the Korean War came along. They took some of the guys out of the company. Other ones left. They could see that the company was not going anywhere. They left, and from 1956, my grandparents both passed away the same year, and so it's put into a state for me. I had no brothers or sisters, and so it became my inheritance, and the company became smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's about that same time the city of Los Angeles condemned the block where we had our store, and we had to move. And we moved from about a 2,000 square foot building to a 750 square foot office. So when I finally came into the company, I had left a job at Dole Pineapple up in San Jose. I was going to school and working, and came down to run this. Didn't like to want to get in front of people. I stuttered terribly in those days. So by the second month, or by the first month, we did a total sales of $2,300, and basically we're losing money, and still continue to do that. And that was in May 1963. Something's got to happen. Either we're going to close the doors, or we got to do something. And I'd call on gas stations, I'd call on anybody who had a truck, or anybody who had serviced a truck to see if they could buy things. And I found myself making sales, and I thought, well, this is kind of fun. But I was still making calls on small customers. Big fleets scared the heck out of me. But there was one fleet in town that was one of the largest fleets in town, called Pacific Motor Trucking. I got my nerve up one day and drove over to the yard and found the office and knocked on the door, and they invited in. Told my story to a fellow named Bob Hickey, and told him what we did, how we did it, and what we sold. And sure enough, a week and a half later, I get a phone call with an order. So that became the first order. And I thought, well, then I got a little more courage. I thought, well, I'll go start calling on more people that are bigger. And I started doing that.
But at this time, you're out making calls. Your mom's at the store working the counter, right, and you've got one driver.
Right. My job was basically to go out and deliver parts to customers when they phoned in.
What was the first big break that you had working with Phillips in your early sales career, trying to get the company up and running?
One of my first sales over the telephone was a circus that was coming through town. So they called up and ordered a bunch of lights. I walked them through what they needed. So I went out in the afternoon and delivered the parts. I got a check, came back in. I was very happy about that. It was now one of my bigger sales. And put the money, the check in the bank, and next thing you know, 2 days later, bank calls and say, check is no good. Of course, then I call up to find the circus, and then they're gone.
They're already gone.
And I tracked them down in New Mexico, of all places. This is a couple weeks later. I sent them a telegram, said they had 48 hours to pay the bill. If not, I was going to file charges, and that means that they couldn't get back in California. Next thing I know, I got a check and money order and for the $235, and that taught me the lesson then is that you don't make a sale, or a sale is never complete until you get the money in the bank.
Lesson learned, right?
Lesson learned.
Tell me about your mom. I hear she was a great lighting salesperson.
My mom was a very positive thinking person. Nothing was too hard for her to do, so if we needed to sell products, or the customer needed some attention, she would go out and make the sales calls for the company and so on like that. That was back in the earlier days there. But as we hired a salesman, this Mac Smith, he would do that part of it. One day I was making some sales calls, and I'd called on a company called Transport Cartage, a guy named Chuck Lamont, and he'd give me an order for light, or he was going to give me an order for light bulbs, but he said, geez, I'd like to do it, but you're too high priced. And I thought, God, I'm really limited in what we can do, so I had to pass on the order. But I'm driving around to make a pickup one day at the GE, and I thought, if I could just buy direct, I could pick up 25 to 30%. That got me thinking on the next step. Well, how about lighting? As the year progressed, we started selling a little bit more Grody, because not many people were selling Grody. We had a company called King B, but Grody came to us, and the sales rep came to us, and so now we had GE light bulbs and we had Grody lights. But I wanted to get into the bigger part of it. So I invited the vice president of sales, a fellow named Ernie Schiller from Signalstat, to come out. And 2 weeks later, we were signed up as Signalstat distributorship. Now we got into the bigger leagues. This was by 1964, 65, something like that. And once we had the Signalstat, once we had the Grody, once we had the GE, Tungsol was a flasher company. We had that. Now we're starting to getting more lines, and I needed more salesmen. And from there, we opened up H.W. Phillips Company, and we had a place to park in front, place to park on the side, and that's how we got started. But a couple things happened then, and the most significant part was that April 1st, 1980 was a day we decided to move into our new building. April 1st, 1980 was also the day that Department of Transportation decided or inaugurated their deregulation. But anyway, we had just moved in the building, had a huge mortgage on the building. Now our margins went down, our customers went away, and we didn't get paid. And that was a very, very tough part of my life, but we survived it. And I made a decision to put the company up for sale, and we had a friend in Northern California named Terry Short. So we sold the H.W. Phillips Company, and he bought that. He didn't buy the name; he bought the physical assets of it. And then we started spending my full time into the manufacturing side. prepared for this presentation, walked in the office a couple days, or a week later, I guess it was, my appointment was, made the presentation, left that, not knowing where I stood on the business. So in this case, I got, it's cold morning, I got this nice plastic light come out of in my briefcase that had been in the trunk of my car, put it down on the floor and stomped on it, and the thing just shattered. And one day I'm thinking, God, if we could only do a coiled cable, it would last longer, we could charge more for it, we would have no competitors on it.